What up, guys? It's Chris. Sure, by now you guys have all heard the big news. No, it does not pertain to me. It is in regards to Zuffa, the parent company of the UFC, acquiring/purchasing Strikeforce. Gotta say, slept in today, Saturday, so I was a little late to catch the news, but when I did, I was just like, whoa. I was taken aback. I was like, man, this is really gonna just turn things upside down in mixed martial arts. However, after watching Dana White's interview with Ariel Helwani, it may not be quite the game changer that you would think upon initially hearing of this news. In the interview, Dana White, for the most part, kept saying that it's going to remain business as usual. To that, he was saying that although Zuffa and the UFC have purchased Strikeforce, they're going to run as separate entities. Strikeforce is going to continue to run their business as is, fights on Showtime. Scott Coker will still be in charge of the product, and the fighters will continue to fight under the contracts that they currently have intact. So Dana said that the reason that they purchased Strikeforce was because in order to build the sport, they need more fights and more fighters. However, if you think about it, why would they need to purchase Strikeforce for that? If they were going to run them separately, they could just let them. There's no need to purchase them. There's no need to purchase them because the sport would grow by having separate companies because they could run fights in the organizations as they do already. What I think this means is, first off, I think it's a great move by Zuffa to purchase your number one competitor base. Not to say that Strikeforce was any type of a threat to the UFC, but hey, if you got the power and the ability to do it, to purchase your top competitor, why not? It's only going to be beneficial to them in the long term. What I think that Zuffa and the UFC are going to do here is I do think they're going to allow Strikeforce to run as is for the time being. But I think much like what they did with the WEC, eventually, probably when Strikeforce's contract runs out with Showtime, because Dana's been very critical of the way Showtime handles or helps, kind of broadcast mixed martial arts in their business practices, I think eventually they're going to absolve the Strikeforce fighters, dissolve the company of Strikeforce and absolve those fighters into the UFC. I think that the reason that they did that with the WEC, and the same reason they'll do here, is because although the WEC was a great product, even after being purchased by the UFC and Zuffa, even with their marketing, although they did see an increase in attendanship and viewership, they never really able to gain enough footing to have significant profits. Their attendances still really were kind of weak, and aside from like when Uriah Faber fought, the viewerships were never all that high. As opposed to now that they've, dissolved the company and put the bantamweight at featherweights in the UFC, it's only going to help the UFC's monetary, gains. So, it's kind of like I'm not saying they were losing money with the WC, but they weren't making the profit that they will by adding those fighters to the UFC. And I see the same with Strikeforce. Even with the UFC being able to help market Strikeforce better, and I think help increase the quality of the overall product, I still don't think that they're going to be able to gain enough. They're going to make enough of a profit gains where it would make sense for them to continue running those companies separately, as opposed to just bringing those fighters into the UFC, which would in turn strengthen the UFC product, much as when they brought the WC fighters in. So that's what I think is going to happen, probably within 2-3 years' time. Like I said, once the Strikeforce Showtime contract runs its course. The bad news about them continuing to run business as usual, as Dana said, is that unfortunately, from what he said, we're not going to be seeing guys like Fedor Emelianenko, Alistair Overeem, or Nick Diaz in the UFC anytime soon, at least not within this year, most likely. So that's pretty unfortunate because, as soon as I heard the news, that was the first thing I was thinking. I was like, yes, Fedor finally in the UFC, and Overeem, going over to the UFC, and of course Nick Diaz back in the UFC, and Gilbert Melendez as well as other fighters. Including women's fighters. Something that Dana has said we'll never see in the UFC. So, at least for the time being, we're not going to see any of those things happen, unfortunately, in my opinion. But, like I said, I think long term, things are going to change. Things are not going to remain the same. It is not going to be business as usual. And the UFC will acquire Strikeforce fighters, thus giving them a deeper talent pool, giving the UFC ability to put on more fights and more events, and giving the fans, in turn, hopefully more stacked pay-per-view cards and more stacked events in general. So, yeah, for the most part, I think it's a good move. I'm curious why Strikeforce, Scott Coker would do this. I mean, maybe, I'm sure it had to be some kind of good deal for him, being the Strikeforce has been his quote-unquote baby. But interesting to hear his thoughts on why he decided to go into business with Zuffa and the UFC. Anyways, that's my thoughts on that for the time being. Want to hear your guys' thoughts, though. Do you think it's a good move or a bad move for Strikeforce? Do you think it's good or bad for the sport of mixed martial arts? Do you think that the companies will continue to run separately long term? Or do you think eventually they will merge, much like the UFC and the WEC did late last year? And which would you prefer to see? I'll definitely be talking about this a lot more on tomorrow's Science Science Radio show. So if you guys want to check that out, you can. I'll put a link to the show in the information part of the video as usual, as well as a link to my Twitter. And if you guys want to give your thoughts on it, you can always call on the radio show tomorrow as well. That's for now. Want to hear your guys' thoughts? But until next time, which will probably be UFC 128 predictions, I'm out.